Hi, everyone. It's Jonathan Corrie from Precursive. Hope you're all doing well. For those tuning back in, we just crossed, I think, more than 5,000 downloads for this show, which is awesome. Up from about 500 about 6 months ago, which is great. So welcome back for those of you joining again. It's a grey Thursday in London. I'm in our new head office where we specialize in chalk or cork, I should say. And I'm delighted today to be joined by Josh Sheldon, who is the VP of Professional Services and Support for TraceLink. Hi, Josh. How are you?
I'm doing very well. Thank you for having me. I'm very excited. I'm more nervous now that you said 5,000. So
yeah, I was surprised. Don't worry. I was
yeah,
surprised.
that's great.
Nervous. Yeah, it's cool. It's cool. So I mean, I love doing this part of my job. Now, I wanted to ask, so North Reading, is that in Boston or is that just outside Boston? Whereabouts? That's Massachusetts, I believe.
That's correct. So just a little bit north of Boston. I live close to Boston myself in Somerville. We're about 20 minutes north of Boston. And actually, it's no longer North Reading. During COVID, we switched offices. We're now in the next town over, Wilmington, Massachusetts, we just opened the office right after we kind of came back from COVID, and we're in the office in the brand new office.
I love it. I love it. I went to there's a stop. So this the slight digression. So years ago I used to go between Washington DC and New York because I worked for a company that was head office in DC, and I'd always go and see some friends in New York. So I remember once I was in Grand Central Station talking to my wife whilst I'm getting on the train, and I've unfortunately got on the left train somehow rather than the right train.
Oh no.
and I'm on this train thinking to myself, this is awfully busy. And because normally the train from New York to Washington is actually quite quiet. And I said, after the phone call finishes, I'm sat at this busy table. I'm like, this is the train to DC. And this guy's like, yeah, boy, you go to Boston.
Oh.
So I think whatever that first stop is, I think it was somewhere in Massachusetts. I was like, oh, this is beautiful, but I really don't need to be here.
Yep.
And I've got to come all the way back. And there's that amazing countryside, though, isn't there? Coming sort of back in or going out or back into New York is wonderful country.
Absolutely. Yeah, we used to make that trip quite often. I was working in Jersey. My wife was in Boston. So we made that trip quite often every weekend when we were doing that. That was before marriage, but every weekend when we were doing that, you got to see the beautiful countryside. You got a little tired of it after a year of it, but
well, you got married out of it. So that's that's good. Awesome. Well, listen, thank you for taking the time. So give us a little bit of background then to kind of what's the scope of your current role, and tell our audience a little bit about TraceLink, if you don't mind.
Yeah, sure. So start off with my background. It's probably a little bit different than some of the people that I've heard on the podcast before. I actually started my career as an elementary school teacher down in Tampa, Florida. I'm originally from Erie, Pennsylvania. From there, I had a chance to start a rock band after my first year up in Wilmington, Delaware. Not that we ever did anything with it. It was just kind of, we got together, could never find the people to make a full band. So we just had fun. And I needed a summer job in the meantime till I got a job teaching in Delaware. And I started working for a company called Blinds to Go, selling window treatments. And at first I said, you got to be kidding me, selling window treatments. But I fell in love with it because it was extremely consultative with the customer. No one comes in knowing anything about blinds. And I discovered I have a knack for decorating. So I did that I grew into management with them as a company. And actually at one point I was managing a store with 5 Harvard MBAs working for me who were training to go into the corporate side of the business, but it just really helped me get an understanding of business. So then I knew I wanted to get more operations under my belt. So I moved to Target big box retail. I did that for 8 years. When I left there, I was a general manager for a store here in Massachusetts. But 8 years, learned a lot about process, efficiency, and stuff like that. From there, while I was at Target, I actually did my MBA at Boston University, and I knew that retail just wasn't where I wanted to stay with my career. And I had an opportunity to go to Kiva Systems, which is now Amazon Robotics. I was a client manager there for 1 year. I had a wonderful boss, Philip Carpel, who took a chance on me coming from retail into—
Shout out to Phil. Shout out to Phil.
Yes, into high tech, and robotics. And so I did that for a year, and then TraceLink came to me and headhunted me from Kiva Systems. And basically what they said, at the time they were about 40 people, and they were looking for someone to start this network idea that they had, where basically they had the software infrastructure, but they were looking for someone to set up the processes for how do they build, in essence, the data of the network, and how do they gather that and efficiently get that in. And at the time, it was thought maybe I was the one network success manager, a new title created for TraceLink, that was going to be in charge of the network. Well, a few years later, I was, as I moved up through that part of the company, I was senior director of service products and network success. And I oversaw 5 different teams, and the network success team itself made up of, I think, about 15 people. So just the growth of that was phenomenal. And then from there in 2020, October of 2020, they came to me and offered me the position of vice president of professional services, which was, it was a scary proposition because of the fact I had not been in professional services before. But obviously, as I grew on that network side of thing, I had a lot of experience. I interacted with them daily, so it was a very exciting proposition. And then over the last couple of years, I've taken on the support team as well as our technical account managers. So it's definitely been an exciting. I'm actually in June 2nd will be 8 years with TraceLink.
Yeah. No, I was fascinated. And by the way, I've never run a software company, so I most of us are all making up as we go along, and in our lives, I think, and certainly in our careers. When we were chatting when you were down in, is it Costa Rica or Dominican?
I was in Puerto Rico. Yep,
Puerto Rico.
From Puerto Rico.
And I was saying to you then, I deeply believe this. I think the blend of industry experience, like I started in advertising, and then I worked in recruitment, and then I worked in events where I met my wife. Then I worked in an information business and a consulting company, and now I'm in software. And I think, we'll talk about it a little bit later on. I definitely think like that blend of experience just makes you, arguably, you just got a broader array of business acumen because you've seen it from multiple, through multiple industries and different lenses. So I think it's super interesting. I think that makes, I actually think all of those experiences coming into professional services, which is combines such a wide range of skills. I think it's an interesting background, and there's no reason why others can't do that. Excuse me. So before I choke, you've seen, various iterations of the business, and now we're seeing this even in pharma, right? This change in the evolution of how services delivery happens. Tell me a little bit about kind of how that's come to life for you guys, because I would imagine even in the world of pharma, with it being heavily regulated, you probably got some of those more high velocity services delivery type situations.
Yeah, so to give you a little bit of background on TraceLink, to give some information of kind of the evolution that we've had on this, we started off, one of what really got us to grow right about the time I joined the company in 2014 was we were focusing on serialization. And so there were all kinds of regulations coming down from different government bodies starting in the US, where the pharmaceutical industry had to track drugs as they go through the supply chain to prevent theft, fraud, counterfeit, and that kind of stuff. And so that was really one of the driving forces behind what we were doing. And we had this network model whereby anybody could send in one format of the transactions and the data that they wanted to send in, and we could send it outbound in whatever format the receiver wanted to receive it. So it really enabled people to grow their network extremely fast. Now, In the world of serialization, there was enormous, and I should say there is enormous complexity, and the regulations change, the way industry handles it, and the use cases change. But because of that, a large part of the project is just the setup, so it's a very prescriptive step-by-step setup that you need to go through. Not a lot of opportunity for customization or anything like that, because it is what it is. This is how it has to go. And it's a fun and exciting, but also a stressful environment, because you're out ahead of your skis, because everyone's trying to get ready for this deadline. And when you have a go live, all of your customers are going live, so you can imagine the stress that creates on the organization as a whole, but especially professional services.
Because it's going live across all your customers.
Not all, but all that are meeting that regulation. So anyone that's looking to meet US, it was November 27th of 2014. And, as we moved to Brazil, April 28th of 2022, everyone was ready to go live.
Would it be comparable to people getting ready for something like GDPR, for example? There's ongoing regulatory changes. Understand.
That's a very good comparison.
It's very cyclical in that way.
And so with that, though, and I think as we look at, models of on-prem and where you have a heavy setup in the process and in the implementation, I think it's a little more prescriptive, and, depending on the solution that the company is doing, you don't have quite as much opportunity to customize on things. And maybe if you do, that's after this long process of your setup. Whereas as TraceLink is in the midst of a transformation, we're continuing with our serialization business, but now we're also adding on to our ability of, having this network and collaborating with your partners. We're developing a platform where our customers can develop applications and our partners can develop applications. And we're at the very beginnings of having that capability, where the first thing that we're going to be working on is supply chain work management. And with supply chain work management, it's the ability for someone in the pharmaceutical industry to be able to, or any industry that's supply chain, to be able to collaborate with their partners on a single platform. So gone are the days of sharing Excel sheets through emails, phone calls, and stuff like that. And what we're going to be able to do because of our network is, if you have an issue, for example, with a supplier, you can open a ticket with that supplier. And even if that supplier is not a TraceLink customer, they can collaborate and share documents and make comments on that ticket with you together. So now you have the ability to collaborate, and it exposes visibility into what's going on in the supply chain that you've never had before. And then as we get more of that information, it's collective intelligence of what's going on throughout the supply chain. And we have the ability to integrate with other companies, such as one that we're working with is Kinaxis. So you can actually see what's going on in the world in the supply chain and stuff like that. So we'll kind of get back to the point. The big difference is the setup for this isn't heavy. And so we can work pretty much from day one that you start your project. We say, here you go. Here's the basic. What we're going to do with this project is we're going to try to get you value as soon as you can, but we're going to use the agile methodology. And with each sprint, we're going to be able to tweak and iterate based on your real world experience. And so that's been a big difference on the way we implement, going from that waterfall methodology, moving to this agile methodology. And it's all about that ability to customize. And I think in the world of low code, no code, this is becoming a lot more of a feasible way to do things.
Okay. So to recap, serialization is on-prem.
It is not on-prem. It is SaaS. It is SaaS. Still considerable setup for serialization.
So they're both cloud, as it were.
Correct.
Right, they're both cloud. Okay, okay, so they're both cloud. One waterfall, very heavy. The steps are arguably very similar, but it's the compliance around it. No, that makes sense. It's just a lot more. They're very different motions, aren't they? They're very different motions to manage, for individuals to work within and to think about how, the importance of process in agile, right? Process is important in waterfall, of course it is. I would argue you've got a lot more around kind of risk there, on the risk management element. But in agile, it's you're coaching an entirely different set of behaviors for the organization and the people in many cases. So given the role of the business model sort of shifting, right? You've got these different offerings now. Sort of talk to me about like the challenges of how is that impacting like the services delivery and the metrics that you look at and all of these types of things.
Yeah, so looking at the metrics aspect, and as we look at some of I think some of the past podcasts that you've done, I think Dave Kellogg had a really good some really good discussion around this.
Yeah,
is sort of it's the mind frame change for the team to focus on time to value. And so in the world of compliance, it was you have to do this no matter what. In TraceLink, I truly believe we're the best at implementing and getting someone live as soon as possible, and that network model allows for that. But it's everybody has to do it. There's not an option to meet compliance or not meet compliance. Whereas when we move into the world of supply chain work management, where it's a value add product, time to value becomes so unbelievably important, because if the customer isn't seeing results soon, if they're frustrated with the process, and if it's not an intuitive process, you're at risk for the customer becoming disengaged and perhaps not using that product, or even worse, they're going to find another vendor who can get them live quicker. So that's been a big change for us as we look, instead of kind of let's get this project done, the customer kind of guides it depending on their systems and their partner system, to now we've got to get them to a point where they're recognizing value ASAP so that they don't become disengaged. I think the other thing alongside with that, and this is where Dave Kellogg talked a lot about this, is the Csat metrics. And making sure that we're focusing on that time to value, and so I think some of the stuff that we focus on is very similar to what we did in the world of serialization, but now with a focus on the do you feel like you're set up to be receiving the value? Do you think the product is with all the configurations and the discussions that happen in those sprints, you're going to get the value that you set out to gain when you purchase this product? So I think that kind of encompasses that idea of moving to the time to value metrics. I would say another thing that has changed with us with this change in the business model for professional services is the value of partnerships. So in the world of serialization, we definitely had to have partnerships. And there were times where there was just so much that we really, like when the EU started their regulation, there was so much going on that we had to rely on partnerships. And we always believed in partnerships. And, we're not the type that are going to beat up on our vendors or anything like that, but truly have a partnership with them. But as we move into this world of a platform company, it becomes even more important that your partners feel valued and engaged with the process, and that they understand we're in this together to be successful together, because now those partnerships become revenue drivers for you. It's not just about the ability to do that implementation, but, our partners can develop their own products on our platform, which is a revenue driver for themselves and for us. So that I feel like creating those relationships in the partnership and making sure that they feel valued is extremely important. And then lastly, with all of this, I think, especially with the ability for other people to be able to develop on our platform, is the value of the community. And making sure that we're building a community that, as we're beginning this, we're going to have to nurture this community quite a bit ourselves, but getting it to the point where it can be self-sufficient. And so that, so that the teams aren't single-threaded and, trying to answer all the questions on the community, but rather the community has its own life, and people are facilitating on the community for us, so that we just become that much more scalable when the community is helping to serve a lot of the customer questions and insights. So those are some of the big things that have affected us in terms of our services delivery.
Yeah, communities are a funny one. There's so much there's so much marketing that goes into that, really, because I don't think there's anything more frustrating in the world for companies who operate in an ecosystem where they've got partners around them, either sourcing opportunity or delivering opportunity. And you hear, you built a knowledge base, or you built enablement, you built community, you built resources to like scale this thing. And then you hear, oh, I didn't even know this existed. And you're like, that's always a funny one around communities. I like this. I like what you've talked there about. Well, you've raised an interesting point for those listening, which is like, is where you're operating mandatory or is it value add, right? Because if what you're selling or providing, and you might have both, by the way, right? Like you guys do, and if you do, that mandatory business will be very cyclical. I mean, we see this a lot with like audit vendors or tax vendors, right? Where they're enabling that audit process or the end of tax year, and it's like, no, there's a deadline that we're working to and it needs to be done, and there's that built-in urgency. On our last podcast, we had Brad Jacobs from MongoDB, and he made a very good, very elegant point, which was like that business, the quality of that business case drives the deployment urgency. I think there's also like a layer above that, which is this: is it mandatory? Are you value add? Because if you're value add, like you say, time to value is probably the critical metric, but for very different reasons to something that's a necessity. That's very interesting. Cool. Okay. Well, look, I think one of the things that I, clocked about you, and kind of as a lot of people rate you very highly for leadership, and clearly you put a lot of time and effort into like your self-awareness about that. And you've also, you've seen the 40 to 800 people, right? Which I was saying to you is you can find a lot of people that have maybe done 100 and above, or 200 to, they've joined at 800 people to whatever. Finding people that have done what you've done, those numbers is rarer, right? It's rarer. And that's the journey that kind of we're going on. So I found it interesting. But anyway, I digress. So I guess, what are the lessons learned?
Yeah, so I would say, and this is a lesson I think is applicable to any situation, but it's all about the people, in especially as I look at our world of serialization, so kind of taking a step into that part of our business, it is complex. It takes, people years to get caught up and to really understand all of the choreography and the use cases and the regulations in the US, Brazil, Russia, EU, so there's a whole lot going on. So those people and your ability to hold on to your people becomes one of the most important things in that world of complex, in terms of complex implementations. And so with that said, I'd say one of the biggest things is making sure that the career of your people is one of your absolute number one focuses. As you're going through from 40 to 800 people, there's going to be a ton of opportunity. There's going to be a lot of fun and excitement, but there's going to be a lot of stress as well. And so I feel like if your people know that you're taking care of their career, you're going to be able to hold on to them longer. And I can say in that journey from 440 to 800 people, I've lost a lot of people internally to other teams, which I say proudly, because now I've got a team that sees that there's challenge and there's growth within the company. And so that excites them and holds on to them, and they want to be here because they know we're trying to take care of their career. But it also gets your network throughout the company that much stronger, where it's funny, I was actually talking to a couple of people in development today, and I found out one of my former people is working on a really important thing for me. And I said, hey, I need you to pick that up. I really want that soon, so it's so good to build that network. And like I said, just makes people feel cared for. The other thing that, was really a big lesson that I think we knew was there, but as I said, in the world of serialization, you're constantly going for deadlines. So you're ahead of your skis very often, but getting that training structure in place. I think that's something for the last few years that the team, always wanted more training so that they could get up to speed faster. And even those who are experienced, you have a new regulation and they need to learn all about it. And so what we've been working on is creating a framework so that those people involved in the go-to-market process, have a framework of, I know I need a training about the overview of the product. I need a training about the overview of the regulation. I need a training about the overview of the choreographies. And so now, as they're going through that go-to-market, they know, oh, this is a great example. We just had a conference call. We recorded it. This is a great example of that training. So getting that training structure in place so that it can be easy for the people that are building it, but also be comprehensive for those who are going to be taking it. And when you're doing that in a fast-paced environment, it's not always that easy. So really having the framework for it is important. And then the last thing I'd say is, as we look at the world of serialization again, is going into these markets where they just exploded because of the target available market was huge, and we've done extremely well throughout, is the ability to have those partners that can also deliver the services as well, and making it truly, like I said before, about a partnership where you're sharing your pipeline with them, so they know when is the pipeline going to be huge and when is it going to be small, so they can make the right business decisions. I never want someone to think that I'm going to be giving them a ton of business and then I don't, without having communicated to them so that they're completely aware and can decide for their own business what are the right things.
Yep. I mean, there's a few things there that we've seen. So I think on the training side, it's interesting in the world of services and in customer success that people, when you ask individuals, where do you think they need to get better? A lot of people default to product. Like, I need to know the product better. I need to know the product better. And it's like, well, actually, kind of think about it, coaching people around thinking about it the other way about, well, actually, it's the customer acumen, the domain expertise, the industry experience that kind of allows you to articulate how the product adds value to a customer. That's actually the bit that is harder to oftentimes to teach and to learn. And takes a lot more time. You've got to be a lot more creative about it, right? You can't just sit there and read a book about the industry. And then I think on the, so that's kind of one thing there around. I just think the ability to career path around domain expertise and services is so important. And then the other thing that we see a lot is, particularly on the partner ecosystem piece, is you've really got to line yourself up with partners that look like you, right?
Yes.
Like we've got delivery partners for Precursive. As you know, we deliver a services delivery cloud, right? So it's a Salesforce-based product, PSA solution, right? And when we were initially looking at the kind of this partner ecosystem, I was thinking, right, let's get PwC, let's get these guys, like let's get the big boys, and then that'll give us that distribution channel. It's like they don't give a shit. Like they literally couldn't care less. So you have to find those partners. So we started out with boutique partners as delivery partners, and then we found much larger organizations to be more like marketing orientated partners with, because kind of our marketing and our thought leadership is probably ahead of where our actual throughput of delivery work would be, right? But I think it's like finding people who look like you and then evolving that as you go through the journey, right? Because the partner is going to put as much into it as is appropriate to them, right? And what you can give to them. It's interesting though, like how, when you talk about pipeline, do you segment the pipeline by internal services delivery and then external pipeline for partners? Do you somehow, or is it one pipeline and then you talk to the partners about what that's going to mean for them?
Well, it kind of depends. I think if we look at the pipeline that are sales that were developed internally from our own sales team, then at that point, we're kind of looking at our capacity. Do we have the capacity? Does my team need additional work, or is my team overworked? If they're overworked, that's my decision to start bringing in a partner. Or there's also language skills, or maybe I need boots on the ground in a country that I don't serve with my own team. And so those are a couple of the factors that we look at as we're considering that. Then there's the idea of if they sell it themselves, we want them to be able to get that services revenue. So making sure we're taking care of the hand that's feeding us in that situation. So that's a little bit of, kind of how we look at that pipeline. And as we move into the new world, again, they're going to be able to develop their own applications. And so on that, they're going to be responsible to do the delivery themselves and set up their delivery method, because it's going to be their own application that they're creating. Now, obviously, we're going to have quality control over that and whatnot, and make sure we understand how they're doing it. But it enables them to almost create their own type of business,
Yeah. Okay. Interesting. So the going back then to came into this world coming into the software industry from outside of it originally, right? So what did the world of retail help you do when it came to moving into this industry and thinking about through the lens of, I don't know, career pathing or whatever it might be? But
yeah, sure. So as I was looking for my career path, and this is something that I do as I'm working with my team, is I tried to figure out what are the 4 things that I want, 3 or 4 things that I want to do in the job. Not what job do I want to do, but what are the 3 or 4 things that I enjoy. And customer service was one I was good at because of retail. Brainstorming and problem solving, I love riddles, so that was important to me. Analytics, I am an Excel nerd, so I love diving into the numbers and slicing and dicing and creating new charts. And then innovation, and I think that innovation piece is something that made me interested in the high tech world, because I knew there was that opportunity for innovation. And so obviously those were the things I was looking for, and kind of things I discovered that I brought to the table because of the retail background was, number one was customer service. I was given a misnomer by people as I was trying to make the transition from a retail environment to a corporate high tech environment, that B2B, business to business as opposed to business consumer, is extremely different. That's going to be a hard jump for you. And I'll be truthful, I don't agree with that whatsoever. I think because of my background in retail, you really learn how to listen. You learn how to empathize and communicate with people. And I would argue in retail, much more irrational people than in business. And so it's all about that ability to set expectations, and then also to be able to deliver on your promises. And so I felt like that customer service that you get in retail. And I'll be honest, if I see someone with a resume where they have retail experience, even if it's as, sort of a college thing or something like that, that's very intriguing to me, because that tells me this person likely, and obviously during the interview, you validate this, likely has some good customer service experience. And so to me, that's really important. The other piece was leadership. As I made the transition from retail into high tech, I kind of started looking around, and I was ready to be an individual contributor for a while as a client manager. But I started looking around and I said, hey, I think I can do this leadership thing in the high tech world. And, as you look at retail, to be frank, you've got a large portion of your staff don't really want to be there. They're just there because, they're a lot of them are making a few extra bucks. Some of it is their full-time job, but it's not always the most exciting job where they love to be there. But thankfully, you do have a portion of the staff that just absolutely love what they're doing. And that said, as a leader in retail, you've got to be really good at motivating your people and listening to them, and care about their career. Often I was helping to mentor people on careers that had nothing to do with the job that they were doing for me at Target, but helping them to figure out, what is it that you want to do? What are you doing in school? Let me help you. Let me ask you some questions so that
life motivation, right?
Exactly,
because it's transitory, isn't it? They're studying, they're working in a shop.
Yes.
I did it.
Yeah,
I did it.
Exactly. And I think
best job of my young life was Whirlwind Videos, late 90s. Shout out to the Whirlwind Videos alumni. VHS that was as well, Josh. None of this.
Say we're showing our age with that one.
None of this DVD digital rubbish.
Yep.
So the thing is, though, like you say, if you see someone with retail background and you're looking at their CV and that's interesting to you, do we need to think though differently about the route into something like PS or or customer success? I mean, there's a blurred lines between the two, but let's like the world of services, right? It can be very costly and very challenging to scale up your team with everyone who's got the perfect experience. And as you described earlier, it takes a while to build up that experience in your world. So, like, is it important to think differently about where we source the pool of talent from, in your view?
In my opinion, absolutely yes. And I would argue beyond services that that's the case. Now, I say that with the caveat that, depending on what you're doing and, what the complexity is, you've got to be aware there's certain levels of skill set or, industry knowledge that someone may need that makes that a little more difficult. But, when I am doing the hiring, I look for two things. One, does this person seem like a highly intelligent person? And two, do they have a great personality that I think would fit well within the company? And that doesn't mean that they're outgoing and gregarious or anything like that, but just that do I feel like this is a good person, and ultimately I think with those two things, you can take someone that's an intelligent, good person. Your ramp up may take longer depending upon the complexity, but once they get up and running, that person in my mind has a lot more potential to go further and to really be an extremely valuable employee than someone if you're purely hiring on skill set. And again, this is kind of something I look at in my career that, my boss at Kiva Systems took the chance on me coming from retail. And I hope he would say that it paid off well, and kind of I look at my career and I think I could say, he made a good decision in helping me make that jump. But, in doing it, you've got to look at the gap that needs to be jumped in terms of knowledge, jumping from one career to another. And is that reasonable to overcome? And I think if you can decide that that is a reasonable gap to overcome, you can, I think there can be very rich rewards for making that decision. And again, ramp up may be longer, but I think in the long run, you're going to be better off. And if you have that career mindset for your employees, you're going to be able to maintain that talent as well over a longer period of time.
Yeah, it's interesting. I think there's a role that's not in a services organization at the moment, or not one that I see, but that needs to be there, because to do what you're doing, if you haven't got this role, will mean that you'll need very good manager, very good peer-to-peer support, coaching, training, onboarding, all of the rest. And that has a limit, because what happens is you get very busy, that time diminishes, right? We've seen it in our organization. I bet every organization's seen it. You go in to the onboarding plan with best of intentions, then there's an escalation, or there's this project that pushes, and then suddenly you gotta shift timelines, right? And people have to fend for themselves a bit more than you would want. And I think that there's a role within like that operations area of PS, if you can get and I think it pays for itself, which is like that internal development for PS, right? That's someone who's come up through the ranks, been client facing, done the delivery, and you move them into an internal role if they want to do that, and they got the passion for that. So you need to find the person for that, and they can teach. But their role is you bringing in more of the juniors, you're bringing in people with external experience, and it's the academy, it's the development, it's all of that progress. Because, if you're, charging out at, I don't know, $1,000 a day, $1,500 a day, it doesn't take long to work out, or it wouldn't take you very long to do the maths to work out like what that person's billings is for a year versus what it's saving you on hiring people who are going to come in with less experience, but probably on less than half of the salary of everyone else, right? Who you can move up and develop through the organization. So I think, there's definitely something there. So I'm gonna explore who's doing that, and if anyone is, please get in touch with me. DM me on LinkedIn.
And I think that
see where I'm coming from.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that with that comment, it's all about the culture. And I think there's leaders that, are able to establish that culture and understand how to do that. And there's leaders where maybe that's just not their skill set. And so I think in a role like that, you have, that's very helpful. And even as, as someone as myself who, that I'm very mindful of that. And that's what I love to do in my job. But as I grow and I have more people under me, I need to be sure that they want that as well. or to your point, if there's a resource that can help them understand how to do that, and how to build that culture within the team. It's all about the culture, and I think it's such an important thing to have that culture. And if it takes a resource to create that culture, I think that's very important piece.
Okay, cool. Let's turn to, so just kind of like to wrap a bow on this then, what do you see as like the core competencies for professional services staff?
Yeah, so I think the number one piece is, focused on the customer service. And I think there's, a lot of discussion, and I know there's been, some of the white papers put out by Precursive yourselves is, that focus on customer service is all about gaining the ARR in the long run. So it's about that long-term goal rather than just the professional services revenue. And I think the customer service is what gets that to you. So again, a shout out for anyone with retail background. And I think that some of it is, the thoughtfulness and the ability to listen and ask the right questions. And I can tell you, as we're in the midst of our transformation, that becomes even more important because of that the customization that can be done on the product. The ability to listen and ask the right questions become so important. And then, not afraid to ask questions if you don't understand it, and also not afraid to be truthful, but being able to be diplomatic about the truth, because as we all know in PS, sometimes you are the bearer of the bad news. But if you can do that in a way that sets the expectations and the customers see your customer service and that you're a partner with them, I think that goes so much better. And I've always said, sometimes if you have a bad situation and you do the right things to turn that situation into a positive one, I think you get a more loyal customer out of that than had that situation. Not that I ever want the bad situation to happen, but if you handle it right, I think you can really get loyal customers. And then clearly, as we're talking about project management, organizational skills and the ability to properly document the information is extremely important. And then depending on what you're implementing, obviously the prior experience can be highly important, but I think some of those other things are foundational before the experience. Just because someone has the experience in the supply chain doesn't mean that they're going to provide your customer a phenomenal experience.
Yep. Okay. No, I definitely think there's some commonalities in these competency models that aren't as well documented as they should be. So I think based upon what you've described, you've got that customer service piece, which I would include communications and stakeholder management, for example, in that. Being outcomes orientated. As you said, I think we've done a lot of writing on this. I think it's this outside in thinking, right? It's like the number one goal is this person has paid us to do something for them or deliver something for them via our products. They want to get a return on investment. They're trying to drive an outcome. They want to generate some value from that, right? Which is either revenue growth, cost savings, employee experience, time savings, whatever it is, but there's an impact to that thing. We deliver that. They pay our bills. They renew, they grow, second order revenue, all of the above, right? Rather than being this, but what about our margin? So I think that's very true. I think the interesting point you raise around thoughtfulness, though, so like this thoughtfulness and curiosity of people in this area. So finding people who've done that elsewhere. I also think the diagnosis skills that you described, right? The questioning. I'm not a huge fan of the term discovery. I think I kind of hear it a lot in our industry of SaaS. It's all about, we're doing discovery. It's like, well, arguably you should know your customers' problems before you go in the office with them, right? Because you're operating in their industry every day. What you're doing is diagnosing, how do those problems come to life for them? What are the causes of them? Unpacking that, and what's the impact of it, right? And being able to articulate that, and them being able to articulate it, because a lot of the time they can't. And that's why discovery goes off in all these different directions. You need to control it. I love diplomatic truth.
Yes.
That's a great word.
That is a unique skill.
The words around, but that, like, the truth be diplomatic truth, right? That's awesome. Okay, cool. So just then landing on the last piece then. So this transformation, because I think so from what you've described, you're not phasing out existing products, right? You're adding new products to your portfolio, and you're allowing then them to be delivered and built on this platform, correct?
Correct.
Okay. So how then has, like, kind of, is that from the mindset of the founders of the business, and that was the direction that they wanted to go? Tell us a bit about that.
Yeah, so initially, as the inception of TraceLink was happening, the whole idea was around this network where you could exchange information and transactions with your trade partners throughout the industry in a very quick and easy manner. Serialization just happened to be a ripe place where government was driving it, and so people had to do it. So it was a ripe area for us to try this out in, and it turned out great. And we've got over 286,000 entities on our network. And so that allowed us to build the network and start building that out. But there was always this vision of supply chain, and how do we make the supply chain better and improve people to be able to do business and collaborate in better and more effective and faster ways. And so come around, probably around 2019, we started actually, this was always in ideation, but around 2019, we started building the technology to, begin to move to a platform company. So now it wasn't just a software company where they were able to get the serialization, but now they're able to build things themselves on top of our platform. And then, so this was an idea that was starting to move forward, and then COVID hit. And when COVID hit, the impacts that had throughout the supply chain and the lack of communication and the difficulties that people had dealing with supplier issues and knowing where their product was just absolutely amplified. And then obviously as COVID, as we came out of COVID, there was the whole bullwhip effect where we had ships upon ships at the docks, and so they're just, that collaboration through emails and phone calls, you just lost all that data, and to search for that in emails and independent places was very difficult to do. And so we kind of realized that this is, we're seeing in the real world right now exactly what we've been saying about the need for collaboration between parties in the supply chain and to get that visibility. So that's really, this was always an ideation and stuff that we were working on and developing, but I think COVID really amplified that message of things happen in the supply chain. And so it just kind of fast forwarded everything that we were doing to get to where we are today, so that, the industry looking towards Industry 4.0, where, you've got Internet of Things, where things are in the supply chain and you're collaborating, is just made so much more efficient by this platform and the ability for people to collaborate on one platform rather than emails and phone calls and Excel spreadsheets.
Yeah. Okay. Interesting. Yeah, I mean, I think that acceleration is the commonality for many, right? At the moment, is just like the acceleration of the need to work better internally and with your client. We've talked already about how this filters down into the world of PS and moving towards this world of more simplicity and having that almost like more of a consultative approach, right? Because it's less prescriptive than the serialization area. Final piece then. What kind of guidance would you have? Because you're a very structured guy, which I think is super important in the world of services, because there's so many moving pieces. So what guidance would you have for others that are looking at planning a transformation of services delivery, including anything, strategy, governance, whatever it might be, technology? Like, what are kind of some of your learnings there about this change and enabling the change?
Yeah, so I would say one of the biggest things is, as we're looking at this transformation, is not to over-engineer your processes, because the reality is you're heading down a transformation, you're going to want to, I think the nature of the structured people is we want to create processes, step 1, step 2, step 3. You've got to be very cautious not to over-engineer that, because I think the nature of what we do is once you build that process, your plan is to come back and revisit that process and say, is it working? But you don't always do that in reality. And so I think in the beginning, it's about building the skeleton for your processes so that you can add the meat on as you're learning and as you're going through this transformation, so that your processes are maturing with the product itself. And with that, I think something I missed earlier as well is really instilling in your team, yes, we have this mature product. We're a very mature company, but in this transformation product, we're a startup all over again. And so having that startup mind frame, and not only with your services group, but really establishing that throughout your development, your QA, your product management. So you've got this pod of people that are really focused on, acting like a startup. When something happens, we're all on it and trying to figure out how to solve it as fast as possible. Mm-hmm. I think another big thing that we've been learning is communication channels are huge. When you've got this new product, everyone in the company, all of the salespeople, all of the product and marketing people are going to want to know, they're going to want to ask the project manager every day, what's going on? And so they're getting 10 emails, hey, what's going on with the project? And so figuring out a communication channel and governance that works on that front so that you're proactively taking the notes so that people can easily open that information and find it, and perhaps setting up a weekly call with the stakeholders who are asking this question so that you're enabling your project managers and your technical consultants not to be constantly reading and responding to the emails, but rather they've got a platform to be able to provide that communication that's really important to these other stakeholders, provide that information out to them to make sure that they know what's going on. Yeah. And then I think organizationally, just kind of doing that inventory of what are the skill sets that you have today and what are the skill sets that you need. Can I overcome that gap of skill sets with training? Do I need to bring new hires on? And if you bring new hires on, ultimately with the plan to train your existing people, and I think there's kind of a back and forth on that where they're also being trained by the existing people too. And then the partner ecosystem in making sure that, because we're a platform, like I said earlier, our partners become so much more important to us, and making sure that they have the right skill sets as well. As we're making this transformation, because serialization is closely adjacent to supply chain, we have some of our partners have really in-depth knowledge on the supply chain. And so this is going to be easy for them because they've already got the resources that understand supply chain. And we can learn from them as well because of the relationships that we've established with them. And just in that also understanding how much do you plan to deliver versus outsourcing to partners, and really looking at that largely from a scalability perspective. And then the last piece I'll cover is, technology. I think, in your podcast with Nate Bidding, there was discussion of you need to be able to scale exponentially, not horizontally. So, really, how do you create case deflection, whether that's through chatbots, whether that's through your community? And, I think in the services delivery, I think in that discussion, you guys even said it is a little bit harder, but where can you use things like RPA, for example, to make the job of the setup easier for the team? And then, and then obviously, like I've already said, the community, I think, is so important to be able to have that self-sufficient atmosphere for your customers.
Yeah. I got to put you and Nate on the payroll, because that's kind of the business case for Precursive, right? It's like, how are you gonna scale from 30 to 60 if you've got all this admin and these processes that don't work? Because from my side, like you say, it's people underappreciate the amount of communications that services people have to do internally as well as with the client. We hired the amazing Zoe, who is our product marketing manager, and she used to run onboarding for a SaaS business. And when she joined, she'd never done product marketing before. And she was like quite nervous. And I said, I don't care. I'm like, the problem. I'm like, imagine how you spent your day. She works in a business that didn't have a great solution for delivery. And what was your day like? I get up, start work, send out updates, do work, send out more updates, answer questions, right? I'm like, that's what we solve, right? Because when I want to know what's going on, I just go and look in Precursive, which is nice, right? I don't have to ask people stupid questions internally. I overheard a conversation today in the office, and I shouted at someone, not shouted at them, I shouted across the office, because they're like, oh, how is such and such going? And I'm like, look in Precursive, it will tell you. I can tell you where it is. But I think we underappreciate that, because it's all time, right? It's all time that these people are like spending on things. But I really appreciate your time. That wasn't a overly overplug of what we do, but I'm very passionate about it. But I do think lots of insights today, which I always like to try and summarize a few of these things. So thank you ever so much for taking the time. I think there's a number of things, right? I think, for those listening, give some consideration to what is your value proposition? Are you mandatory or are you value add? Are you somewhere in between? I would also argue that if you are that value add, you should be mandatory, right? Like, in a way, if you're going to add that much value to a customer, then it's something they should absolutely need to do. I think very interesting thing in scaling was this idea of like losing people internally to other areas is not a bad thing, because it broadens your network and your relationships within the business, which ultimately in services, you are leaning on sales, you are leaning on product, you are leaning on support or whatever it is. That's really interesting to me. I'd question whether that would apply externally. Like, you wouldn't want to lose too many people externally, but actually it's that alumni in the marketplace. I think the role of the services, I don't know what to call it, services trainer is a bit dry, but maybe the services evangelist who's teaching and coaching everyone and bringing that, like, is that a career path within services, for example, or just an option, right? Like, you've had someone that's been working their ass off for, 3 quarters on the bounce, give them a quarter doing nice training and development internally, for example. The diplomatic truth, I'm a big believer in language. That's a key behavioral trait for services people. And then I think the final thing you said, I love the word skeleton. And I think this is a big, we see this all the time, like companies are trying to productize their services delivery, right? And everyone's talking about, right, we want to deliver this MVP to a client. And yet you go, okay, show me the task list or the project plan. And it's 500 things or it's 200 things. You're like, well, hold on. How long is that piece of work? It's like, it's 60 days. It's like, well, no. Hold on, so have a skeleton and then iterate on it, just like you would iterate on an MVP. You've got to iterate on your process. Try and take it to the minimum and then build it back up a little bit. I think that's a better way to look at it rather than starting with everything and trying to rationalize. Thank you, sir. Really appreciate it. Did you enjoy it?
It was fun. And I got over the idea of 5,000 people listening.
Well, not at once. There could be, it's 5,000 in total.
Yep. That's still impressive. That's great.
Split across a few. There'll be a fair few, I'm sure. Thanks so much.
You've added me as a fan recently, so I've been listening. So,
all right, awesome.
All right.
Thank you for
Have
the
a good one,
feedback.
Jonathan.
Take care.
Bye.
Bye.